Hey, Den of Geek fans and all you spooky nerds out there. Welcome to the Paranormal Pop Culture Hour. I'm Aaron Sagers, a journalist who explores the paranormal, creator of the entertainment site paranormalpopculture.com, and host of the paranormal podcast Nightmarica. And also you can see me on travel channels Paranormal Caught on Camera. So for the past several weeks, we have, in conjunction with the excellent folks at Den of Geek, we've been doing these weekly hour-long chats with friends and colleagues in the paranormal as we head into Halloween. And hopefully, if you guys like these, we'll keep doing them. So tweet out your support. Anyhow, let's get to it. So since October 2017, these guys have explored the high strangeness of all manner of the paranormal. And recently, over the summer, they really did a deep dive into the Roswell case, which I highly recommend it as someone that is a fan of the Roswell incident case files. It is a lot to cover, and somehow these guys did it and established a timeline. And it only took them 3 episodes, which I tip my hat for that accomplishment. But that 3-part Roswell episode installment is a highlight. Anyhow, the show is called Bigfoot Collectors Club. And instead of just Sasquatches and skunk apes, these guys talk about aliens, ghosts, and every kind of weirdness. Let me tell you a little bit about them before I bring them in. Michael McMillian is known for his role as Steve Newland on HBO's True Blood. His other credits include recurring roles on Perry Mason, which is a great show, Silicon Valley, Hot in Cleveland, and the critically acclaimed Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. He's also Emmy-nominated host for his work on the Game of Thrones Lincoln Center premiere for HBO and Facebook. He's an open-minded guy, grew up fascinated by the paranormal, and he says in his lifetime he has seen one ghost and what was probably an alien. Bryce Johnson, co-host, is a film and television actor notably known for his roles in Willow Creek, the excellent Bigfoot horror movie directed by Bobcat Goldthwait, Death Valley, and Pretty Little Liars, as well as voicing the title role in Marvel's full-length animated film, Doctor Strange. He, in addition to acting, you guys have seen him on travel channels, Expedition, Bigfoot, and he says from an ear with a yellow-eyed demon peering through his window to filming UFOs, Bryce begins his paranormal experience and labels himself as a true believer. And there's also on-mic producer Riley Bray, who is an LA-based musician and producer known for his work with the psychedelic spaghetti western band Spindrift, featured in numerous TV and film projects like Vice and Quentin Tarantino's series Hell Ride. He's also has songwriting work for The Golden Ghosts, which has been showcased on the Discovery Channel and exclusively for Van's Surf and Skate videos. And Riley also works as a front of house engineer, having mixed for musicians like Robbie Krieger, Leslie West, the Delta Riggs, and Best Connection, and countless others. So he's also a content creator for Gibson TV. Okay, with all of those in mind, let's bring these guys in. Riley Bray, welcome to the Paranormal Pop Culture Alley. And Bryce Johnson, you're here as well. Welcome in. Yeah. And
what an intro.
Hey.
Yeah.
That's all. That is a lot of biographical information to keep in mind. So we apologize, but we appreciate it.
Hey, that was great. You sound legit.
You do. I memorized all of that too. So
very good.
Very impressive.
No reading happening. And let me know, for the people, all you guys out there in the comments, let us know if you have questions. Throw them out there, and I will harass these guys with those questions. So, okay, let me start. Michael and Bryce, you guys obviously are both actors, and this initial mutual geek out came about on a job. So tell us a little bit about how you guys met and how the paranormal first came up as a conversation topic. Michael, why don't you start with that?
Well, I think Bryce and I were always destined to work together because actually our story goes back years and years ago. I wrote an episode of the sitcom What I Like About You, and Bryce ended up guest starring on that episode. And I really liked his work in that show. And I ended up I think, we met. He didn't, we didn't work together as actors on that. So I was just standing off stage during tape night. So I think I knew him more than he knew me. And I kind of followed his career. And then luckily, a few years later, we ended up guest starring on a TNT show together called Major Crimes. And I had just seen Willow Creek like 2 days before. I mean, this is already, we're getting into the synchronicity here. And it just so happened that 2 days later, I was on set with Bryce again, and I'd followed his work. And I was like, oh my God, dude, I'm so excited that we're working together, because I just watched Willow Creek. And Bryce was like, are you into Bigfoot? Are you into that stuff? And I was like, yeah. And within minutes, he was telling me his interdimensional Bigfoot theory, which I think I actually brought up first. And that gave him permission to open up about his, up his weirder side.
And Bryce, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's funny. You meet a lot of people in this business, and funnily enough, there's not a lot of people you could talk to about the paranormal. I mean, it still has just like in mainstream, it seems to have a giggle factor with a lot of people. So, when I could feel Michael's earnestness, and it was fucking on. We were on to like talking aliens and ghosts and mystical experiences, and I mean, we really bonded right then and there. And it wasn't until a little later. Michael's always had a love of podcasts. He's like, we should really try and create a paranormal podcast. And that was it. I mean, it was like, yes, let's do that. It's on. And we started right in my garage. And it wasn't too long later, maybe 2 or 3 episodes later, just by another synchronicity, we recorded at Riley's, what we call the Bigfoot Collectors Clubhouse. And at the end, he was like, hey guys, I'm kind of into this. What do you say we all do this together? And we were like, oh, fucking great. And so it was on, and we've been doing it ever since. And we've been on such an incredible journey together.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned like people in the people are not necessarily always into this. And I think overall, people in the entertainment industry may be more likely to buy into it. And I think part of that is just the nature of the job. People travel around a lot. You stay in strange hotels. That's just sort of happens. But even within that metric, I believe in ghosts. Do you believe in? Yeah, I think that's quite possible. But once you get into interdimensional primates, it seems like that's when things go a little bit off the rails. I mean, and we'll circle back to that, but would you agree with that? That you have to there's little metrics on the weirdness.
Yeah, you kind of have to initiate people. I feel like step by step, it's almost like being your own little cult. You're like, all right, now we'll feed you a little bit more and a little bit more. But yeah, I think so. I mean, it's all weird stuff. I mean, for me, the weirder the better, the more interesting it is.
Well, and Riley, you seem.
Oh,
go on.
Oh, I was just going to say.
The conversation lag.
Yeah, go ahead with you, Aaron. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask Riley about how he got into it, because he also, in addition to being the producer on Mike Producer, he also sometimes is not the voice of skepticism, but a little bit more in that skeptical side of the spectrum, it seems like at times. So yeah. I just want to hear about how you got pulled into it.
Well, the way I got pulled into it, actually, I was recording a different podcast with Jen Kirkman, and Michael was her guest, and we got to talking after the episode, and that's also why we call Jen Kirkman the godmother of our podcast, because she's the synchronicity point. And we got to talking afterwards. It's sort of the same thing. He's like, "Are you like into aliens at all, or ghosts or whatever?" I was like, "Yeah, totally, man. I love all that stuff." And he brought up the idea of doing this show, and they hired me for a few episodes, but then I just knew right off the bat, I was like, these guys are going to be my friends forever. And there's something really cool we can make here. And I wanted to dig in more and start doing music on the show and more production. And so I just thought, rather than them hiring me, like, let's make this a partnership and just do this all together. And that's how, and then I've just gone down the rabbit hole with these guys. And as far as sort of being, I sort of take a role as like a moderator on the show where I'll
Mhm.
I'll sit back and I'll let everyone talk, but and I'm keeping track of everything. But yeah, I think similar to something that you were saying before we started rolling is I sort of take a journalistic approach to it where I'm like, this is the story. Let's
Yeah.
present the story. Let's be open-minded to people's experiences and what they have to say and take these accounts seriously, but let's not fully drink the Kool-Aid on it. It's keep an open mind in both ways. Never quite make up your mind all the way. I think that's a safer place.
Riley's also good to pull Bryce and I off the edge when we get a little too like on a tangent or on a rant. He'll be like, well, I don't think that's exactly right. So rephrase that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's nice. And he's a brilliant musician who scores all of our stories of high strangeness on the show. And I feel like we just completely lucked out with not only having an engineer who was like-minded and interested in the topic, but also is just like whose talent is really unending. Like he can jump in on the conversation, and he's like, if you go back and just listen to the way that and he's always been a great musician, but just like his scoring has really reached, I think, a cinematic level on the podcast, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. So we really lucked out working with him, and it was mutually beneficial because I don't know how many episodes we would have been able to afford paying for a producer.
Yeah,
So it all worked out.
Riley, you're in.
I do. No, I really have to compliment you guys on the production value on the show, especially when you can pull out little audio gags like the reassigned or accused, threatened.
Yeah, unfortunately for Riley,
but as guys who work in entertainment.
Oh, I was just saying is unfortunately for Riley, the better he's revealed himself to be as an engineer and as masterful as he is, because that quality is all him, the more Bryce and I want to throw in little tiny things for sound effects and gags. So we just keep piling more work on his plate.
Yeah, just see how far we can push it. But I mean, I love it. It's such a fun show to make. We really, I mean, we take the stories seriously, we take people's accounts seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. We don't take the subject too seriously, and we have a lot of fun with this show, and it's a fun topic to get into, you know.
Well, and I'm curious about, as guys who work in entertainment, this is something I've thought about a lot, because working as a journalist and then working as an entertainment journalist and then talking about the paranormal, I often think about the pop culture influence, both the good and the bad. Sort of like Jaws had everyone afraid to get in the water. And after The Exorcist, people were talking a lot about demons. And have you ever thought about how the work that you do maybe influences belief and perception in this kind of paranormal phenomena? And Bryce, why don't you take that as someone that was in Willow Creek and then also has done the expedition show on travel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a responsibility of entertainment creators to sort of, open people's imagination up. And, I was going to say, talking about earlier in this giggle factor, in Hollywood, think about how many supernatural storylines there are out there, but still not a lot of people really delve into the subject. They're cool with talking about interdimensional quantum theory, Bigfoots, but when you really bring it up and like, is that, what do you really think? They're like, what are you talking about? That's where I'm just telling a crazy story. And it's like, no, there's something to this. When I was doing Willow Creek, though, I mean, Bobcat and I was a huge kind of Bigfoot guy before that. So when he called me about that job, I was like, dude, absolutely, yes, you got the right guy. And we really went on a journey together to sort of, bring a lot of credibility about people who research Bigfoot and the lore of Bigfoot. And, there's so much real things taking place in that film. And that from both our love of the subject. I mean, we both take it very, very seriously, but in a lighthearted way. But yeah, I think it's a great thing to be able to influence people, to open up their minds a little bit and expand. And as you know, Aaron, I think paranormal stuff is sort of coming back into the zeitgeist, and people are really starting to get a kick out of exploring it.
Yeah, well, it's I think about it because I do think when we have all of these streaming platforms, it used to be that there was the genre would ebb and flow. You know, a couple years ago, starting in 2005, we had sort of ghost hunters and then ghost adventures and the paranormal state, where those were the three staples that launched this modern paranormal investigative type of show. And then those kind of expanded, but then they contracted and it went away. But now we seem to be in this new wave where it doesn't appear to be going away, and Travel Channel, case in point, seems to have dedicated their entire network to it.
Yeah, it definitely, I think, is like you said, it's been cyclical, but I think now, just with so many channels and obviously with niche subject matters being able to really live in their own world now online, and again with streaming and cable, it just, there's room for it now. You know what I mean? I think we're just not as limited by programming, and I think it's just a really popular thing. I think we're hitting a generational thing where it's all UFOs, ghosts, all this stuff has really come back into the zeitgeist. A lot of that is helped by, the recent news in the past couple of years with the Pentagon releasing videos. X-Files has had a resurgence. I think this stuff just kind of comes along and gets really popular every 15, 20 years as kids grow up and become young adults, and then young adults get into mid-adulthood and go, yeah, what the hell what is going on? I think every 10, 15 years, we tend to collectively question our reality. And it's funny because when we started Bigfoot Collectors Club, it was like 2 months later, the New York Times released that UFO story in December. And suddenly it was like we were just ahead of that resurgence. And so we kind of lucked out in that way. And we've been kind of riding the wave since.
Yeah. Well, Michael, as a follow-up to that, do you find that people do not know the stories as much as you might expect? I mean, all of us, like we are into these, we go on these deep dives looking at the Betty and Barney Hill story or whatever it might be. It's part of our childhood, part of our hobby. But are you surprised to find out that people don't know the stories like Roswell as much as you think they might?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that we don't know them as well as we thought we did. I mean, that's what happens with every week when we really do some research. Like, I had a general knowledge of Betty and Barney Hill. I could tell you the highlights off the top of my head. And then when we did that episode it was our 100th episode that guest starred Paul Scheer. That was kind of the first step into us doing something like Roswell, where Bryce and I decided to collaborate on it together. We read the book Captured and really started to do some more deep dive research. And there's just so many wonderful things that come up. Like, I didn't know, for example, that after their abduction experience, Betty and Barney Hill, especially Betty, because she lived longer than Barney did, had all of this weird poltergeist activity in her house and was seeing orbs and had objects move around the room. And that was something that was an element to this high strangeness that had come up in other stories, like the Debbie Jordan Cobble abduction experience, the Copley Woods abduction, where we had seen in some of our research that there is this weird connection between poltergeist activity and people who have been abducted by UFOs. So that came up in the Betty and Barney Hill stuff. Never knew about that. And then just getting into the real specifics about Roswell, there was just so many more eyewitnesses and so many written testimonies and affidavits and deathbed confessions that obviously men like Donald Schmidt and Tom Carey had already done, but we just hadn't sat down and really the reason it's all there. All the books are written. You just really have to go beyond a YouTube video and just really dig in and find out about this stuff.
Yeah, and yet, so we exchanged emails and we were talking about. I've been to Roswell as well. I know you have been. This is this story that's more than 70 years old at this point. Is it? You guys dedicated a lot of time to this, but what was sort of the argument as far as we should put the time into this? Doesn't everybody already know Roswell? This is I don't know. It just it seemed like an interesting choice to spend 3 episodes, hour and a half long episodes, talking about this case, was there ever a moment where you thought, or is this worth our time?
No,
Bryce?
I don't think I don't think so. I mean, and I think why this case stands and why people coming back to it is it seems to be our best chance at getting at the truth of what is taking place. I mean, we know for a fact that this was really the time that the government decided to cover up something. I mean, we could all but pretty much prove that this wasn't a weather balloon. I think that's something that, you know, everybody can get behind. And after that, you're really left with, well, what could it have been? And you're not left with a lot of options. I mean, you're left with some sort of top secret governmental aircraft, perhaps Russian. But then I even leave that by the wayside when I hear so many witnesses talking about this memory metal that they could hold in their hands, light as a feather, spring back to life. They could cut it, burn it. It wouldn't untouchable. And then you get so many witnesses reporting these pilots, these alien beings, and you're left with, you know, the simplest explanation, which is that you know, an alien spaceship probably crashed in Roswell or Corona in 1947. Occam's razor, man. I mean, we're left with the truth, Aaron. You know, we as a planet are being visited.
This is Bryce's razor, not Occam's razor.
Yeah, and I
For the
think
record.
just from a point of view of the podcast itself, you know, we were in the middle of, and still are in the middle of, the pandemic. We had a little bit more time on our hands to do a deep dive, and I knew that we were always saving Roswell as a big tent pole episode. In fact, in my mind, I was like, okay, when we hit 150, we'll do Roswell as our 150th and get a big guest on. But when the pandemic hit and we were sitting around, I think originally I pitched titling the series, "Fuck it, we're doing Roswell," because, you know, it was just like, why not? And I wanted the challenge, put the challenge towards myself and forced Bryce to do the same thing of like, let's see if we can take one of these big stories and stretch it across 3 episodes and really do it justice. I'm somebody, you know, I'm a fan of, obviously, last podcast on the left, we've had Henry Zabrowski on the show, and I really admire Marcus Parks' ability to deep dive on a topic and carry it over multiple episodes. And in fact, a cheeky admission, you know, I checked their I'd heard their Roswell series and checked how many episodes that they'd done, and they'd done 2. And I was like, all right, let's do 3. Let's see if we can take it even further. And there were moments where I was like, maybe this is too much. But once Bryce and I got into the real, you know, deep research, we were like, oh, clearly there's so much here. And we decided to do the first episode sort of from Mac Brazel's point of view as the guy who found it. And then the second episode is from Jesse Marcel's point of view and the military sort of side of things. And then the third episode we reserved to really get into the people who claimed that they saw the alien bodies themselves, and then theorize what the bodies could have been, and then ultimately try to put together a timeline, because that's the thing that's really hard about Roswell, is with all these different eyewitness reports, and because it was so long ago, there's a lot of contradictions on sort of what happened on which day, and you have to sort of go, oh wait, if Marcel was in Fort Worth by this point on Wednesday, then this thing had to happen on Tuesday, and you can't really find, even in the work that is done in Witness to Roswell, there's not always a solid timeline. So that also became, once we got into it, we realized, oh, we're sort of on a mission now to try to piece together a cohesive narrative. And we couldn't quite do it, but I think we got pretty close. And I'm pretty proud that I think that if people ever wanted to know what exactly happened in Roswell, they could listen to these 3 episodes and get a really good idea of what the basic narrative is.
Riley, I got a question for you, because listening to this 3-part series, you could almost visualize at time the Charlie Day meme from It's Always Sunny, where he's got the diagrams around. And I'm kind of curious, from the producer perspective, between Bryce and Michael, whose mind was melting down more? Who was kind of going down the crazy path more? Because I could hear it at times that they just had. If this was a visual medium, I would expect like papers and chalk everywhere and yarns connecting the dots and like
you
a
should
little
have seen my
model. Like, yeah, that's like this. I felt it. I felt it. So Riley, who was melting down more?
I mean, I definitely felt that as the weeks dragged on, as we were making this thing. I was like, wow, these guys are going for it this time. But I would say that Bryce is sort of already there. He already has that wall in his room, all tied together with red string and pins. So it was. I would say Michael had more of the slip down the rabbit hole on this one. Like,
yeah.
I think he really he went method on it, and he's just drinking and reading and writing and just like in his
drinking
little
a lot
zone.
of rosé. I was drinking a lot of rosé, and
Yep.
and then having like lots of weird dreams.
Also, I was going to say a funny thing happened. We tried to record while I was filming somewhere on location, and I was having bad Wi-Fi, and we just couldn't. We couldn't get the episode together. And Michael's like, "I'm ready to talk about Roswell," and we felt like this Roswell blue balls just swelling up. I had to like walk around the block and like get it off my chest because we were just like raring to go, and we just got like baby has to sit in the corner, and man, we were just. We were pumped. It got really exciting because we felt like we were, opening up some new things about this story, and it really came to life when I think even for Riley and when we're kind of talking about all these witnesses' perspectives and details that so many people miss because they don't fit in a box, and it really took on a life of its own.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Roswell's a great story for this because it is so strong in pop culture, and like everyone has heard of Roswell, but when you really think about it, like what do you actually know? And that was my role in our series, was that I didn't research at all. I just sort of had my basic X-Files knowledge of Roswell, so I could sort of be the stand-in listener. And it's amazing when you actually take a deeper look at these sort of pop culture stories and see what's behind them, and then the way that gives you a lens to start looking at reality and looking at the world. Like when we were getting into the aliens, we started getting into this whole discussion of like, well, maybe they're from a singularity based AI and they've grown them with a synthetic nature based technology and they're biological drones. Like maybe that's a thing. And so, going from like this sort of like kitschy, oh yeah, alien in the desert, to like talking about maybe it's our destiny to make gods is amazing, that you can use this thing as a lens to like really start looking at your reality and your perception and what is beyond just the idea of, oh, a ship crashed in the desert,
Yeah, that's a great point, Riley. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to follow up and say that the podcast for me has really become an exercise in creative thinking and imaginative thinking, and sort of taking these stories and then trying to unpack them beyond just like, all right, this person was crazy, or there's no way this could have happened. It's sort of like, okay, if we were writing this story, how could we justify the weirdness here, and what about the world or the universe could support something like this? So it forces you to really imagine a much weirder reality than the one that we're typically presented with.
Exactly.
Well, and it doesn't even feel, and I mean, Bryce, I know you use the word coincidence, but it's hardly even coincidence when we're talking about this stuff happening, Roswell in particular, where man was sort of manifesting or channeling the power of the gods with the atomic weapon. It's of course that's going to be, I mean, even just from a Star Trek level, like of course when something like that happens, it piques the interest of the Federation, so if there was extraterrestrial life out there, if suddenly they're seeing us split the atom, it would seem like pay attention to that. And that is indeed, rather than coincidence, like convergence is what seemed like it happened. But my follow-up to that though is, what's the bridge too far for you? Because there's aliens, okay, and there's Sasquatch, maybe. There's the idea of interdimensional Sasquatch, okay, and maybe instead of alien grays, they're some sort of drones, or perhaps they're from the future, or creations of us, or hybrids. Then you go down that path of like fairies, vampires, werewolves, elementals, nature spirits, and I'm weirdly, and I've evolved into an everybody into the pool kind of guy, where I'm like, if you're going to accept one thing, then you have to kind of weirdly open up to all this shit. What's your bridge too far? What's the thing you can't get on board with? Michael?
I think that, go ahead.
For me, I don't know. I think I try to walk the line between folklore and then eyewitness accounts, and oftentimes those things will cross over. But I think like there are definitely stories that we hear, like werewolves is one of those. Like Dogman was one going into this podcast where I was like, there's no way. I don't believe in Dogman. Like I believe in Sasquatch, but if you're gonna tell me there's like a giant bipedal dog walking around, forget it. And then I read the work of Linda S. Godfrey and the people that she has interviewed, and it is very difficult for you to go, okay, there's nothing here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't necessarily think that there's such a thing as a werewolf where a man actually transforms into a flesh and blood wolf creature, but there might be some sort of phantom entity or interdimensional entity, and see, this proves your point, that might take on that form, or some type of psychic experience where people might witness that form, or other people might witness that form in that person. I don't know. It's tough, but I think if you just kind of have to pay attention to, okay, what's folklore? Where does vampire come from? And I'm paraphrasing here, but that originally that came from, opening up coffins, grave robbers opening up coffins and finding that the skin had deteriorated and that people's nails were extended and hair seemed to be growing, and these ideas that, oh, maybe this vampire was still living, this corpse was still living after it was buried. You can kind of trace some of that stuff back. Or the idea of when a family member died of an illness and then the rest of the family got sick, it was that dead family member coming back as a vampire to kill off the rest of the family. So there's stuff like that. But I don't know. For me, what's really too far is coming down on a hard belief with any one thing and going, I know the answer. This is what it is. And I think we get into dangerous territory when we go too far down the path to say there's some big evil thing that is controlling all of this stuff that's out to get us. You know what I mean? Because then I think we've suddenly veered off into the territory of really paranoid and dangerous conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's when you latch on to belief without proof, especially if it's belief based in fear. I think that's my bridge too far for sure. That's where things get very murky very fast.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, I don't close off the possibility. Do I think there are werewolves? I don't actually know. I don't tend to go that way, but yet there's so much folklore and story surrounding it. But it's, for me, that there's like that spectrum of belief where on one side is almost dogmatic belief, and then on the other side is sort of cynicism. But if you kind of move in the middle, like a sliding scale in the middle of skepticism, open-mindedness, that's where I think things get interesting. And Bryce, add to that. I know you had a child in the background for a second.
Yeah. You just get out of here.
I was stalling for you.
I think you're absolutely right. And just, going off of what you said, we have to understand, myths and beliefs and psychology as well, if we want to formulate a relatively working hypothesis of what this phenomenon is, So you need to understand where the idea of something silly like a dog man comes from, and something that we know we don't really believe, like a vampire. There's something to be gleaned from that, whether it's how people think, how people perceive something. I think what we're all starting to learn from doing this podcast is that the observer plays a tremendous part of a paranormal experience. There seems to be a cohesion there. It's really a dance. So, it's interesting. I'm always interested to hear what an eyewitness or a contactee has to say about their experience, even if it's so strange, like this creature made me a necklace out of Skittles. I want to know about that because, maybe there's a clue there. Maybe there's some detail that I can connect to another paranormal story that I heard about elves or fae or trolls or doing a cultivation of Pan. There's always some kind of something that you can help connect the dots, and I think that's what I think is really exciting about this paranormal field is people aren't afraid of like staying in their own camps anymore. They're starting to reach across the aisle, and Bigfoot people are talking to UFO people, and UFO people are talking to fairy people, and we're getting down to some brass tacks about, man, what if all this stuff is somehow connected?
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that I think another element to it is that with podcasts like Bigfoot Collectors Club, I think with some of the TV shows, but also social media, it expands that reach and taps into sort of that I guess mistrust of the government. I mean, going back to Roswell, when that happened, trust in the government was at this high coming off of World War II, but then it started to get chipped away at. And then by the time the Patterson-Gimlin film was released, we're sort of on the Watergate era and really mistrusting the government and mistrusting what's coming out of that. Do you think we've reached this point now where people are like, of course they've been lying to us all this time about everything, not even just the paranormal, that we're going to go out and establish our own beliefs through podcasts, through social media and YouTube and TV shows? Do you think that is happening right now?
I just want to touch on, go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead, Bryce.
I'll just touch on it really quick. I think you're exactly right. All that part of it plays into it. And unfortunately, people coupling their mistrust in government, there's also a sort of a mistrust in the scientific community for not really investigating this stuff for as long as they haven't. And so now people are really starting to question, well, what do you really know, government? What do you really know, science? And here we are, all with more questions than we started with.
Yeah, I think it's generational. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, I got into sort of this stuff because X-Files was on TV, and Chris Carter was at the age where he had gone through the stuff in the 60s and 70s and now was in a place of creative power where he could put it on TV. He grew up watching In Search Of and The Night Stalker, and now he's making X-Files. And I just think it's, again, every 15, 20 years, there's a renewed interest in the UFO topic. There's a renewed or rejuvenated, I think literally term distrust in the government. Obviously things are wild right now in the world we live in. So it's no surprise to me that people are that the UFO stuff and what the government is hiding is really back in fashion. So I think it'll probably die down in the next few years and maybe 10 years. And then it'll be dormant for a while. And then in 2039, 2040, we're going to see the kids today grow up and get back into it and really, kind of continue the cycle. That's what I think.
Riley, any thoughts on it?
I mean, I think that we're in a time, especially in America, where we're seeing a real erosion of trust in our government, like more so even than I think we saw like in the 60s. And in our institutions and in our basic myths that we tell ourselves. And I think the paranormal can be an escape in a lot of ways for that, to try to let's build up some new myths and find some connection and build some things around it. But I do think there's a point where it becomes too far. Like the conspiracies in the 90s were a lot of fun, and conspiracies now are not at all. And they kind of reflect a really intense division that's happening in our society, and people sort of clinging to things that are dying off, and people being afraid of change that's coming. And it's a really weird time. And that's why for me, I like to look at this paranormal stuff not from this conspiratorial lens, but more from a lens of sort of like a philosophical look at our reality and what our consciousness is. Because the conspiracy stuff, it starts pointing to some difficult times that we're facing, and we're going to have to get through and figure out how to come back together again.
Yeah. And it's funny to me because I often say on social media, I'm like, I've spent a good portion of my career talking about things as crazy as reptilian people and draconians and Sasquatch, interdimensional Sasquatch and everything. So shit has gotten really crazy and really weird when the conspiracy theories are weird for me, where I'm like, I can't deal with this. Like,
Yeah,
well, and we're all very cognizant of that, and we know where a lot of those roads lead, and that's why we stay away a lot from conspiracy theory, because you don't need to go down those roads. There's so much to have fun with in these stories of high strangeness, and there's so much to get out of them that we don't need to like figure it out and connect the dots to the evil, nefarious person behind the curtain, because a lot of that times that just ends up being bullshit and you're being led down the wrong road. So,
that's usually somebody proselytizing and getting you to believe in their beliefs, and this is, look, I mean, it goes both ways. There are the cultists that think that aliens are here to save us. And then there are the dark conspiracy theorists that think that the aliens are going to destroy us all and are running the world. So we stay away from the two ends of those spectrums. We just like the stories, and we try to figure out, like Riley said, like, okay, what is our reality? What's weird? Is this all a waking dream? Is this a simulation? Is this some sort of higher intelligence that's engaging with us in a way that we don't really understand? Whatever it is, these are some cool stories, and we want to keep these kind of stories, especially the eyewitness accounts, the stories alive.
Well, and so speaking of an eyewitness account, Travis Coleman says he saw a Bigfoot at a distance while hiking in the woods as a kid at camp. Now, as far as your preference, as far as the kinds of stories, obviously when you're doing a podcast, you want to have enough meat on the bones for a story to fill an episode. But you personally, do you enjoy hearing more of those stories of someone that a haunted house had a series of abduction accounts, or do you like those sort of quick hit kind of things, those little tidbits of like, I saw this strange thing once and that was it, sort of like Michael and Bryce's, your stories of saw something out of the window of your apartment or of your house when you're a kid peering in. Do you like the big stories personally, or sort of the small little snippets?
Well, for me, my fascination with Bigfoot is I like stories with a lot of evidence, and almost more than any other part of the paranormal world, Bigfoot seems to hold a cornerstone in leaving behind footprints, hairs, scats, video, photographic evidence, anecdotal evidence. I mean, everything else, besides, of course, UFO stuff seems to pale in comparison. And so, and I love what Travis said, I've never been the type of one to discount what a kid sees just because he's a kid, I know a kid knows the difference between a bear and an 8-foot tall creature walking on two legs that looks like half gorilla, half man. I know that, and so there's a lot of stories, like that kid who went missing in North Carolina. I believe his name was Casey Hathaway, who came back 3 days later and said a bear became his friend and protected him. And you're like, wait a minute. Although
so he didn't know the difference between the
I realized I just
invalidated everything you just said.
See, this is the best part of the show, is when we contradict ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what you're saying is there's actually like a Berenstain Bear who was helping him out.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Michael. Yes. See, this is why I need Michael. Yes. No. Exactly.
Bryce brings his own shovel to every episode. We try to keep him out of his own. We try to keep him out of the grave.
I think all the little stories though, they form a big story, and that's why I kind of like the quick hits, because they all start coming together and they form this sort of paranormal world of all these things that really I never really thought were interrelated before we started making this show. And the more we do, it's like, wow, like ghosts and Sasquatches and aliens and people having religious experiences, even like these all feel connected to some other layer that's interacting with us. So I really love our listener file episodes. Our listeners, we encourage them to send us in their own stories. And I just love getting these kind of like quick, short stories, and just sort of realizing that everybody has something that they can't explain. They maybe they don't know what they saw, but they know that they saw something. And I think that's really interesting, something that connects us all.
For me, the weirder the better. For me, with the stories, I love stuff like the Greensburg case, which we did a few episodes back. It was one of our last UFO stories we did for Wet Hot Alien Summer, and it was a story where it was Greensburg, Pennsylvania, I believe, and this is all along that area that I think is like part of, near Chestnut Ridge. There's even a documentary about it from Small Town Monsters, and I think this story is in it. But it's a story about a couple farmers, two farming families who watched a giant glowing ball land out in their pasture and forming a dome, and then out of the dome came two Bigfoot-like creatures with glowing green eyes. And then one of the witnesses had this almost demonic possession episode. And this is all in front of Stan Gordon, who was a young man at the time, cryptozoologist, guy who's, researched Bigfoot and high strangeness, was there with his team witnessing this stuff. And to me, that's great. If you've got it's sort of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe of high strangeness. You get your UFOs, you get your Bigfoot, and they're all in one story. That's the stuff that I really, really dig. The more B movie, like sci-fi B movie the story is, the more I really like it.
Yeah. I have to imagine in that scenario, Mothman is sort of like the Nick Fury that gets them all together and starts the cryptid initiative.
Yeah. Like that.
I mean, for me, I actually like the quick hits just because I think that's how you cultivate the overall following of people that are open-minded. Sort of that sense of like when you're in a bar and you sit next to a stranger and they start talking about things and they're like, well, yeah, I don't believe in ghosts, but there was this one time. And then, it may not be a big story, but it's enough that it kind of creates that little almost disciple in the parent. Like it opens them up a little bit. And I like the little quick hits for that reason. But do you have those moments where you guys do on the show, Bullshit or Believe It? Are you having those moments when you're interacting with people out in the world where you're just like, this is too weird for even me. Like, I can't get on board with this.
It's tough. I mean, I would say not so much. I think though, the one sort of like elephant in the room about a lot of this stuff is there are people who struggle with mental health issues and schizophrenia and other disorders. And there's sometimes we'll come across not necessarily a letter on our show, but we'll come across stories where we're like, I think this person might have been having an episode that needed psychological treatment and wasn't actually a paranormal thing. So I don't know. Sometimes sometimes people can get a little too intense. And I think it's the level of intensity sometimes that will make us go, I don't know. Something doesn't feel right here. But I just go back on a trust your gut. You know what I mean? I think it's important to hear everybody's story. And I think it's good to not discredit their story outright. I don't think we should be making fun of people who are trying to come forward with an experience. I mean, I've had an experience that could be absolutely made fun of. And that's one of the reasons we do the show, is to be like, hey, let's just talk about this stuff. But I think you have to trust your gut. And I think you have to be a little bit smart, have your thinking cap on about who's telling you the story and why.
Bryce, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, and if they've had, let's say, over 20 Bigfoot encounters, they're probably not telling the truth. There's a limit to this stuff. It kind of works like...
or they're experiencing a reality in a different way than we are, and that might be an unhealthy thing or a very artistic thing. We're not, you're not sure. It's a fine line sometimes.
No, absolutely.
Go on, finish. Sorry.
Oh no, that was it. I think John Keel always said when you tend to look into this stuff, it looks back at you. So I get having a few, odd, mysterious encounters throughout your life, but I guess sort of the witnesses who have seen it all and seen it over and over again, I tend to get a little bit like, whoa, okay, where does it start and where does it end? But yeah.
But I kind of wonder I think the mental illness comment is definitely apt. And yet, I think back on, let's say, ghost stories from not even 100 years ago. People were, but they weren't considered ghost stories. If people were talking to people that weren't there, they were thrown in asylum and sanitariums and everything and labeled crazy. And I can't help but wonder about the intersection of the paranormal and mental illness at times. Certainly there are people that have mental illness that's not connected to the paranormal.
Yes,
But
absolutely. Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, and this isn't to stigmatize anybody that's struggling with
yeah,
mental health issues. And also going even further back, you had women who were burned at the stake for just being women and maybe dabbling in a little bit of folk magic behind the Protestant church's back. So a lot of this stuff also is demonized by religion as well, because it goes outside the parameters of certain religious sects and practices. You're right. I mean, we don't know. A lot of this stuff could just come down to the way that the brain works and the brain perceives reality, and and the ways that different brains are wired. This is a subject we were talking about this on Dela Levine, Medium and Intuitive, her YouTube show yesterday. That it's possible that some people are just more talented at receiving this type of information or encounter than others. And it could make people feel like they're crazy when they're not. It's a scary thing. It's a very wild thing. That's why you kind of have to do your best to keep a level head about it and keep a sense of humor about it. It's tough. It's a weird, sometimes uncomfortable territory to go down, but I just encourage people to, whatever it is, share their story, because if it does turn out to be something that might need to be treated, it's good to know that information. And it's also fascinating to me that the brain will manifest reality in that way for certain people.
and someone's having a paranormal experience right now in the background. I think things are flying.
Yeah, there's a
flying
ghost cat.
out
You
the
got
wall.
ghost, Bryce. Child ghost.
Yeah, I
He's
know.
the scariest kind.
Bryce is going through his own nightmare right now, homeschooling 2 kids on his own.
Yeah, he's entered a whole new reality.
I mean, yeah, that's preternatural, I guess, maybe, or not. Like I think that, I mean, I'm a big Keel fan, and Bryce, I love you that you brought him up, because the idea of tuning in. I think the more you look for this stuff, there's not only does it look back, but you start opening yourself up to more of that kind of activity. So, in the time that you have done the podcast, do you find that your antennas have become more calibrated? Do you think that you have opened yourselves up to more potential activity of your own? And Riley, why don't I start with you, since you kind of started as more of the slightly more on the skeptical standpoint of things?
I think yes, to a degree. That doesn't necessarily mean anything has happened or I've seen anything, but I think that it's my mind will tend to wander to these places now a lot more than it used to, and start sort of just really it's a questioning that it starts to grow, and it becomes this kind of like nagging thing of just like what am I, what is this, and where does my mind come from, and those are questions that you always sort of ask yourself if you're sort of a introspective artist type. But I think doing this show and going through these stories and hearing how common it is for people to have these truly bizarre, unexplainable experiences and especially people that really aren't looking for it, you start to become more aware of that in yourself and more aware of that in the people around you, and just become a little more sensitive to the idea that there is an unexplainable phenomenon that's occurring around you and within you at all times. So yeah, I think delving more into this stuff definitely it gets you to kind of look into the void a little bit more, and the void definitely peeks back sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. Bryce, have you gotten more tuned in, do you think? Do you think your antenna has gone up a little bit higher?
I think so. Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I've had some, I would say interesting encounters throughout my life, but, since doing the podcast, the level of intensity has sometimes gone up. But yeah, there's definitely There's definitely something going on. And
Bryce, you're actually out there looking for Bigfoot now, which was something you had not been doing before this podcast started. I mean, that's just physically, and you've seen some weird shit out in the woods.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, so I think just being more open to the idea, like for instance, in the Bigfoot community, if you're going out and looking for Bigfoot, you kind of have a pre-talk with everybody and say, hey, don't go in with a skeptical attitude. Just go in open-minded. It's gonna serve us all better, and we're all gonna have a better chance of experiencing something. And I think that's very true with whether it's to UFOs, ghosts, and or Bigfoot. So I think people who are closed off are less likely to see something. And for me, I kind of I want to experience the mysterious. I want to be enchanted, and so I'm open to those things. And I think it does allow for more experiences to pop up. That being said, I love when a total skeptic, when a total materialist has a paranormal encounter, because it's fun to watch somebody completely go 180. I did not believe in that before, but holy shit, am I a believer now? Those are some of my favorite,
Yeah. And Michael, have you gotten a little bit more calibrated?
I definitely think I have. However, I am a scaredy cat at the end of the day. When it comes to this stuff, I really feel like my tuner has gotten a lot stronger, but I'm keeping the radio off. When I there was like a moment, and it shows up in weird, just almost like basic ways. But there was like a moment a few months ago before the pandemic when I was really starting to kind of get back into tarot, and I was pulling cards, and there were some really wild synchronicities that were happening that may not seem like a big deal, but when they're happening in front of you, I remember just something as simple as I had been on Instagram, and someone had drawn a card and had posted it, and it reminded me. I was like, oh yeah, I need to go. I haven't pulled a card in a while. Let me go pull a card. And I shuffled the deck, and the first card I flipped over was the card that I had just seen on Instagram. And I'm like, okay, out of the entire tarot deck, this is the card I get. And the meaning of it also was very personal to me at that moment. And I think I even texted the guys like, guys, I'm not even fucking kidding. I just pulled this card like 2 seconds after seeing this. And that could be a coincidence. It could be confirmation bias. But I think that's the point is, okay, is that magic? Is it coincidence? Who cares if you can gain some meaning out of it? And to me, that's kind of what life is. We're all living in our own little story. I like the thought exercise that Alan Moore puts forth of like, take a walk through your neighborhood for 5 minutes. And while you're on that walk, look at everything that you encounter as you would interpret as a symbol in a dream, right? So fire hydrant, what does fire hydrant mean? What does this mean? And it's just sort of, to me, again, going back to this idea of it's just an exercise in creative thinking, Yes, you can get delusional with that. Yes, you can go crazy doing that. You have to keep 2 feet on the ground and keep reminding yourself that this is sort of ridiculous. You don't want to slip fully into the world of magical thinking. But there are those little moments like that where I go, oh my gosh, I feel like something sort of, I was knocking the door and it knocking the wall and it knocked back. But I tend to hide away from it a little bit. I really am sort of freaked out, especially right now as we're in a pandemic and I'm living alone. I don't know if I want to summon anything by accident right now when I can't get out of my apartment.
Well, I can relate to that. Like, I'm based in Brooklyn, and I'm not there right now, but living alone during all of this has been weird. And generally my modus operandi is to go look at the paranormal, but create a safe space at home where I'm just like, nope, doors closed, all of this is shut down. And we're not doing this right now.
Don't climb into the gorilla pen. Just when you're at the zoo, just keep a safe distance. Enjoy the gorilla. Don't get in the pen with them.
Well, and I just want to keep you for a couple more minutes. I do want to quickly talk about the Zombie Bigfoot's Cryptid Crypt. This is ongoing right now on Bigfoot Collectors Club, leading into Halloween. Yeah. So talk about the mission with the Zombie Bigfoot's Cryptid Crypt, which is just fun to say. I hope we get a T-shirt out of this because we're already.
Oh, you will.
There's some
coming.
merch on the way. It's not ready to be presented to the public yet, but when it does, I think everyone's gonna love it. So we'll make that announcement very soon. But look again. We had so much fun doing the summer long event, Wet Hot Alien Summer, that we wanted to do something for Halloween. Last year we did sort of a soft one where it was, I think a very Bigfoot Halloween, and all of our stories were sort of, you could trace it to some sort of Halloween theme. And for this month, we decided let's do stories of high strangeness that might be a little bit more horror based, a little bit grittier, a little bit bloodier, a little bit scarier than our normal stories of high strangeness. But again, it's just sort of an excuse to celebrate Halloween and say things like terrifying tales from Zombie Bigfoot's Cryptid Crypt. It's we just wanted something ridiculous as a hashtag, but also kind of I think right now we realize as podcasters that we're some of the only new and consistent and free entertainment for people out there and for listeners out there. So right now, when we're living in a time where every day sort of feels the same and time is sort of myopic, I think it's fun to do these sort of events to just kind of keep everybody's spirits up, So we started it today with Nick Weiger from Doughboys and How Did This Get Played was our guest today on the show. And we're covering the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. It has a lot of dark history to it.
It's a great excuse for me to pull out all the spooky organs too, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
and we created a new theme for the month, and it's like I want to do some goofy, ghoulish voices, and I want Riley to make some scary sounds. Like it's keeping it creatively fresh for us as well.
Yeah, that's
I love it. I'm going to have to check it out. As I said before we started, I haven't listened to that episode yet, but I'm going to definitely check it out because the Cecil Hotel, I think that's a great one to start with. A lot of spookiness, a lot of just morbid tales. So a good time had by all for a Halloween.
episode. No, it is. It's sort of, and as I was doing the story, I was like, all right, hey, everybody, this gets dark, but we'll try not to get too, we don't really like to sit in the gory details too much. We try to keep it a little bit more whimsical on the show, but sometimes that stuff is fascinating as well.
Yeah. Well, and of course, the show is Bigfoot Collectors Club. And where can everybody find you and support you and, just keep the creepiness and high strangeness happening? Bryce, why don't you tell us?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find the Bigfoot Collectors Club. And if you want to support what we're doing on Patreon, it's a different format and it's a lot more intimate conversations like the one we're having right now. We have created almost a whole place as a community for us to get together and talk about anything. And we try and put out 3 to 5 of those a month. You can find those on patreon.com/Bigfoot Collectors Club. And we're on all the social media, but we mostly interact with our listeners and fans on Instagram at the Bigfoot Collectors Club. And we can be found on Twitter at Bigfoot Pod.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add to the Patreon on the other side. It's really become, and this isn't me trying to do a hard sell, I think it's really become a favorite aspect of the show for us because there's a lot more Riley. I feel like there's a lot more of the three of us getting to do a show that doesn't necessarily focus on a guest, although we do have guests. And we do things like the book club, where this week we had, we discussed Devolution by Max Brooks, which is a survival horror Bigfoot novel. And, that was one where we went into and I was like, I don't know, because we had done Mothman Prophecies and Passport to Magonia, where there's so much meat on the bone. I was a little hesitant to do sort of a very well done popcorn novel. But we ended up having one of the deepest conversations I think we've had on the podcast while reviewing that book. And we'll do movies. We've done, B movies and horror movies and stuff like that. We do campfire stories. Riley does some episodes where he conducts his own high strangeness topics. So it's a lot of fun, and it's been a really big way that we connect with our listener, with our listeners. That's been the real joy this year, and has happened, I think, growing in the past 6 months during the pandemic, is I feel like we're really getting to know our listeners over on the other side.
Yeah, think of it as hanging out with us after the show, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I did not know that you guys had just done Devolution by Max over at the Other Side Patreon. So I'll have to go check. I should become a Patreon supporter and check it out, because really great book and a lot to say about it. He introduces. He introduces some wild theories, and then also he did his research. Like, he did his research.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that's great. So if you're a fan of this stuff, you're like, oh my God, you really recognize that work that he's done, and the respect he obviously has for the mythology of Bigfoot. And it's really great because that book, and then also researching Roswell at times, sort of brings us back from the interdimensional edge. And we're like, all right, maybe it is just nuts and bolts craft. Maybe Bigfoot is just sort of a primate that's been avoiding us. I don't know anymore. But that's so great, is you can look at all of these things from such different angles, and still get enough out. Still find new things. Yeah.
Excellent point. Well, I could keep this going for a good long while, but I'm going to let you guys go hang out backstage for a second. But Riley Bray, producer for Bigfoot Collectors Club, Michael McMillian and Bryce Johnson, thank you guys, both co-hosts of BCC. It was an excellent time chatting with you. I really hope to do this again. And excellent work on the podcast, guys. It's a really fun listen. Yeah.
Oh, thanks a lot, man.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate what you do. My new favorite show is Paranormal Caught on Camera, so I can't get enough of it. You do such a great job.
He's sending us videos all the time.
we'll have to do a follow-up conversation about that soon. Yeah. But all right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
And of course, the podcast is one more time Bigfoot Collectors Club. And like I said, I started listening to this back in 2017 when these guys first came out there. And, as someone that works in this world, I'm intrigued. I'm a fan. And it's always fun to see what new people are contributing to the topic. And something I discovered really quickly with these guys is that they do have fun with it, but they do their research and they know what they're talking about. And they take the topic seriously, but they don't take themselves too seriously. And that's something that I happen to really appreciate about Bigfoot Collectors Club. So with that said, let me go ahead and add to that next week for the Paranormal Pop Culture Hour, we're going to be talking about fear and folklore with fear sociologist Dr. Margie Kerr. She's an old buddy of mine, and folklorist Dr. Lynn S. McNeil, who I have the honor of working with alongside on Paranormal Caught on Camera. And we're going to talk about Halloween and why it's so important. And also 2020. Are there legends that are emerging right now during this weird time of the pandemic? And how is 2020 impacting folklore? I'm really excited about that one. So it's next week, October 7th, 5 p.m. right here, Fear and Folklore. And if I can get my own plugs out there, give me a shout on Twitter, Instagram at Aaron Sagers. I also launched a podcast during pandemic time called Nightmerica. That's one half paranormal and one half true crime. I'm an old white dude, and you probably heard old white guys talk a lot about the paranormal, and I'm thankfully joined by a younger millennial woman named Britt who knows her stuff and loves talking about this, so it's a lot of fun. And also head over to paranormalpopculture.com for some interviews that I do with guys like Dan Aykroyd and Judy Spera, the daughter of Ed and Lorraine Warren. So with that said, guys, thank you for being here. Stay weird, stay spooky, and we will see you next week for another Paranormal Pop Culture Hour.